This will be a very brief video discussing asymptotes, something that's usually introduced at an earlier time in the year, but wasn't for this class. An asymptote is a line that your graph is continuously approaching, meaning it's always getting closer to, but it doesn't actually touch, at least not in the extremes. So a good example is the line y equals 1 over x. As I plug in numbers for x, as x gets bigger, I'll go from 1/2, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll go up to 10. As x gets bigger, 1 over x gets smaller. So like if x is 1/2, 1 over 1/2 is actually 2. And if x is 1, 1 over 1 is 1. And if x is 1/2, you get 1/2, and 1/3, and 1/4, and 1/10, and you get the idea. But the point is, even though this number keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, it's never actually going to go to 0. I can keep on plugging in numbers, and x can just keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as x keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, this whole fraction will keep getting smaller and smaller, but it will never actually reach 0, because even 1 over 1,000,000,000,000 isn't 0, it's just a trillionth. And 1 over, the biggest number you can think of isn't 0, it's just a really, 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 really small number. In fact, if I were to take a graph of 1 over x, and this is just showing the first half of it, you can see this line just keeps getting closer and closer and closer and closer to 0, but never actually touches it. It never actually crosses this x-axis. And this line is called an asymptote. So an asymptote is a line that your graph gets closer and closer and closer to, but never actually touches. This has a horizontal asymptote, and it's a horizontal line at x equals 0. Interestingly enough, the graph of 1 over x actually has 2 asymptotes. There's also a vertical asymptote here at the line. Oh, I'm sorry, this was y equals 0. This would be the line x equals 0. There's a vertical asymptote here. If I plug in numbers that get really, really, really close to 0, like I'll go 2, 1, 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/10, I plug in these numbers for x, well, 1 over 2 is 1/2, 1 over 1 is 1, 1 over 1/2 is 2, 1 over 1/3 is 3, 1 over 1/4 is 4, 1 over 1/10 is 10, 1 over 100th is 100. As I plug in numbers that keep getting closer and closer to 0, the graph just keeps going up higher and higher and higher. It will never actually touch 0. It never actually touches 0 because I can't actually plug in 0 for x, because 1 over 0 isn't 0, 1 over 0 is undefined. So there are lots of different types of graphs that have asymptotes, but most of them, well, a big chunk of them, happen whenever there's an x on the bottom of a fraction. This would have asymptotes at x equals -3 and at x equals 2, because those numbers make this equal 0, and we can't actually plug those numbers in for x. So that's where the asymptotes would be. That's all for now. You'll see more of those in a second. Thank you.